As I sprinted through the dark streets, my heart pounded like a drum, echoing the fear that gripped my every step. Chapter 14. The wavy brown locks falling over my stiff shoulders bounced with every step forward in my furious stride. I was beyond livid, fuming even to have one of my closest friends even consider that I'd risk their lives for my own selfish desires. Unbelievable. I was blocks away from my apartment, my feet taking me further than my mind anticipated, as hard as it was to admit. Accompanied by my anger were feelings of hurt and disappointment by Elliot's thinking. I was certainly not going back to my apartment, and I hated asking them to leave, since they weren't all guilty of misjudging my intentions. After 15 minutes of roaming around the streets aimlessly, my phone buzzed in my front pocket as I received a notification. I fished for it and unlocked the screen, to find a message from Ariel asking me to return home. A second later, my phone buzzed again as I received another, and I halted in my tracks to read over the several messages. Noah and Elliot left. I'm going after them to speak some sense into them. They're too angry to understand. But you did nothing wrong. Nora, go back home. I'll return later tonight. I smiled involuntarily, appreciating her support, then returned down the same path I'd taken to go back home. Deep down, I knew Elliot didn't mean any harm. He was just worried, which is something he does often. As the oldest in our group, he kind of feels a certain obligation to watch out for us, especially given the length of our friendship and the hardships we faced together throughout those years. He never admits it, but we all know he feels it, which is why we respect his over-protectiveness. But I had spent such a good day today, after so long of staying on guard with everything, and I only hoped I could end the day by joyfully informing my friends of how amazing it had gone, and to instead be faced by all the criticism and the hurtful words I least expected. I had the right to be mad. I tried to reason with the slight guilt I felt inside. I was snapped back to reality a second later as my phone began buzzing in the palm of my hand. I glanced at the screen and Elliot's name flashed as the caller read. Out of pure pettiness, I let it ring for a few seconds longer, then click decline. That'll teach him. The sun was beginning its descent, turning the sky a bright shade of orange and yellow. The warm colors almost mocked me, as if encouraging my fury and indirectly telling me to grasp onto the anger that was gradually dissipating. Knowing myself, I most likely wasn't going to last longer than a day angry at my friend, even if Elliot's words were somewhat insensitive, because I know him better than to judge him based on his choice of words in one tense conversation. Minutes later, my apartment building came into view. I sighed in relief, the heels of my feet taking in despair. I'm definitely soaking myself in the bathtub I know where Ariel stashes her bath bombs, I instantly thought to myself, an evil grin sneaking its way onto my features. I jogged over the 4 steps leading to the front door, and waved a gentle greeting to our night guard, Cole, who sat behind the front desk. He immediately recognized me and offered a wide smile, gesturing me in. I took the elevator up to my floor, then reached my front door. Knowing no one was in, I fished for my keys from my purse and unlocked the door. Once I stepped inside, a warm gush of air greeted me. Involuntarily, I scrunched up my nose in a taste. I was never a fan of summer heat. Following the source of the wind, I found the living room window half open and ran to close it shut. The whole place smelled like summer, which some might appreciate, but it was never my taste. Moving to the coffee table set by the couches, I immediately went to work on the scented candles, lighting them up to give the place a cozy lavender scent. My feet worked on their own, leading me towards Ariel's bedroom, and then her bathroom. The bathrooms of our apartment was probably my favorite part of the entire place. They were huge, with marbled counters, sink, and bathtub. Ariel decorated hers with loads of scented candles to light up before soaking in the tub. I went to the sink and pulled open the doors of a cabinet underneath, exposing a selection of lush bath bombs. I grabbed a rose, scented one, and then hurried out towards my own bedroom. Once inside my own bathroom, I began to fill the tub up with warm water. and I took out my phone and set it beside the tub in case I get any important calls. Then headed back into the room to find a comfy and fitting outfit for later. I settled for a pair of black sweatpants and a plain light pink t-shirt. When I returned to the bathroom, I found the water to have reached almost halfway already, so I pulled my hair up into a messy bun, stripped of my date clothes, and sank deep into the warm water, dropping in the bath, bomb and watching as it soothingly turned the water a light shade of pink. The aroma lifted to my senses and instantly began relaxing me, and I inhaled deeply, letting the scent fill my lungs and soothe my nerves. I reached for the lighter I brought in with me earlier and began lighting up some candles I had lying around the tub, staring into the dancing flames with a deep interest. All too soon, my eyes began drooping as they got heavier and heavier, and I didn't fight the sleep. I allowed the exhaustion to take over, and gradually watched the flames turn blurry as my eyes fell shut. All I could tell was that it was too cold. Wherever I was, whatever was happening, was causing my body to shiver recklessly. My breathing was coming out in loud huffs as my body struggled to create heat. There was also a faint creak coming from far away, as I tried to regain consciousness. The first thought that hit me was that I was wet. I forced open my eyes to inspect my surrounding, and everything slowly came back to me. I was still in the bathtub, only now the water had turned way colder than I appreciated. My hands coming up to grab the edges to lift myself up, but accidentally knocking over one of the candles in the process. Crap! The melted wax running down my wrist and leaving a burning ache behind. I shoved my hand into the water and stroked the area to soothe the discomfort. I blew out the rest of the candles and again grabbed the edges of the tub, pushing myself upwards with what little strength I had left within me after that power nap. I silently thanked God that I didn't slip underwater in my drowsy state and suffocate. I reached out for a bathrobe and put it on, grateful for the warm fit offered after lying down in the cold water for so long. After searching around the bathroom, I realized I had left the assorted outfit on my bed. I moved towards the door and went back into the bedroom, and it finally hit me how long I spent napping. It was now completely dark outside. It must have taken me longer than 2 hours. Suddenly, someone deeply exhaled from the left corner of the bedroom, my hands instantly coming up to fasten the rope around my waist. I turned on my heels, ready to reprimand Ariel for sneaking up on me that way. But instead of the familiar blue eyes, I found myself staring into a chilling, endless black pit. My throat tightened. I opened my mouth to let out a gasp. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilgan, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilgan, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Anything but the air got stuck in my throat and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on high alert. That was one hell of a nap. His voice was rich with an unfamiliar accent, and hoarse enough that it sent a chilling shiver down my spine. Feeling refreshed, his lips pulled back into a menacing grin. The bedroom door creaked open, and my eyes snapped to the second intruder of the night. Sleeping Beauty up yet? Another unfamiliar voice sounded through the room. He looked taller, broader, and unlike the first, this one had hair on the top of his head. It was long and slick, pushed back. His head snapped up from the objects whirling in his hands, and his eyes locked on mine. The same menacing grin I saw on the first guy appearing on his lips. My blurry eyes flashed down to the object in his right, gloved hand. It was long and silver. He tilted it a centimeter to the side, and it shined. An inner voice screamed at me, but I couldn't comprehend her words. It wasn't until he directed the pointy end at me that I finally realized I was standing on the other end of the intruder's knife. Chapter 15. How about we go for a little ride? The man standing on the other side of the knife proposed, though I doubted I had any choice in the matter. Inspect the opponent. What does he have to his advantage? She looks up for it. The second once sprawled out on my couch commented, and I could almost hear the smirk plastered on his scarred face. Find a point of weakness, or search for a way to create a distraction. I'd allow you to change into a more comfortable outfit, But unfortunately we're running late. Now decide, fight. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilbe, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Had a long day. You looked really exhausted in that bathtub. That last sentence dragged me out of my thoughts. My head snapped towards the man seated on the couch, my eyes widening in horror. He had seen me in the bathtub, where I lied unconscious and bare. A burning bile rose in my throat, and I gulped to try and hold everything in. Though releasing the contents of my stomach on my opponent's shoes didn't seem like such a bad idea. I couldn't spare the time. Their advantage was definitely their muscle, and they were also armed. In my distressed state, I couldn't bring myself to inspect any point of weakness, nor could I arrange my thoughts to fish for a distraction. Control your breathing. The only way out is by maintaining a calm mental state. I breathed in, feeling my lungs expand and a shiver run down my spine. Straightening my back up from the slight crouch I had gone into earlier, an automatic defense position as a result of standing on the other side of a pointed weapon. Here's the thing, Bella. My opponent spoke as he began to lower his armed hand. Through his pronunciation, I recognized his accent as Italian. My hand, he was growing tired. And you seem smart enough to not pull a stunt you'll regret later. He stared back into my eyes, pausing for a second to accentuate the threat behind his words. So, I play the gentleman here. His sentence was interrupted by a mocking scoff from the corner of the room. He glared at the man seated before turning back to me. Raising his armed hand, he swirled the knife around as if showing it off, then slowly tucked it at the waist of his black jeans. No knife. No stunts. Weak point. I reluctantly nodded my head, pretending to accept his deal. See, can I just know one thing? My voice came out in a whisper, and it sounded deeper, like I was suffering from a sore throat. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. The man on the chair exclaimed, throwing his arms up in mock glory. I flinched back, gasping. I looked back at the man standing opposite me, seeing him roll his eyes, then nod at me in encouragement. What do you want from me? Instead of providing an answer, he only groaned in annoyance. That is not my business. I stared at him in confusion. How is it not his business? He was here, threatening me with a knife. He's simply a man, doing his job. The one on the couch explained for him. The man smiled, and motioned with his head towards me. Delivering you. I could only stare back in horror, his words slowly registering in my mind. They were sent to get me. That means there's someone bigger behind this. My heart began to beat rapidly against my rib cage, threatening to burst out at any second. This is taking forever, the stranger on the couch complained, rolling his neck around in a stretch. Can I at least put on some decent clothes? I knew I was pushing my luck, but I needed a distraction. TSK, Ed, I think I like you better in that bathrobe. I clenched my fists by my sides, controlling my breathing that was now coming out in rapid huffs. Maintain a calm mental state. I reminded myself of my old instructor's words. I took a step forward to everyone's surprise. Their eyes widened in amusement as they inspected my movement, and I forced my feet to take another step. Good girl, the man standing in front of the door praised, nodding in approval. He took a step to the side, gesturing towards the door in a fake, chivalrous act. The second the word registered in my brain, an instant shot of adrenaline coursed deep through my veins, traveling the length of my body and finding root in my legs, fueling them with a power I never realized was stored within me. I charged forward in such an instant it took my body by surprise, the bun on top of my head falling back from the inertia. I had memorized the apartment's interior like the back of my hand from the amount of times I'd spent lounging in the living room with my friends, so reaching the front door took less than 2 seconds. I yanked the doorknob with such a force I thought I heard a faint crack as my elbow bone stretched. Within the same instant that I passed the door frame, I heard a loud curse from behind me followed by pounding footsteps. No time for the elevator. I shoved the doors to the staircase and jogged down, skipping to often 3 steps in my hurry to get as far away as possible. My clammy and shaking palm gripped tightly onto the stair rail, begging it not to let me fall. The sound of heavy pounding boots followed behind me, and realizing they had their height to their advantage hence longer legs, I began to hyperventilate and a black spot auto-popped into my vision. I finally reached the end of the stairway and yanked open the door, finding myself right in the middle of the front lobby. My eyes immediately fell to the front desk, seeing a head flopped on top, stiff and immobile. My heart thrummed to a beat so rapid, I feared it might stop all at once. My throat tightened as I recognized the neatly combed black hair Paul. He was unconscious, and as much as I despised myself for it, I pushed my feet to continue moving towards the door, knowing I couldn't spare a second to check whether he's alive, or else we'd lose both our chances at survival. I pushed through the front door with a force that knocked the breath out of me, my eyes frantically searching the empty, dark street for any sign that could help me escape the men hot on my heels. I could hear their yells coming closer by the second, so I charged forward into a sprint down the street, my eyes still searching for any passers-by. I was suddenly jerked by the top of my robe, exposing my shoulders, and roughly hauled over a stiff shoulder that dug into my stomach, knocking the breath out of me. My eyes adjusted to the unexpected change, and I found myself staring at the back of moving boots, stretching my right leg back. I forced it forward and kneed my kidnapper in the ribs, earning a pain doomed as it knocked without of him. However, his grip only tightened on the back of my thighs as he continued jogging away. Raising, I tried to open my mouth to scream for help, but a sudden click had me pulling my lips back together. I strained my head to identify the direction of the noise, and it seemed to come from behind me. Before I had any chance to comprehend what was happening, I heard a sharp, contained pop, followed by a deep groan and the thump of a heavy object as it plummeted to the ground. A second later, the same noise echoed again, only this time it caused a slight vibration beneath me, and the man's grip on my legs loosened, his body slipping away as he collapsed in the middle of the street, pulling me down with him. I found myself falling face forward on the ground, my head roughly colliding with the asphalt. Ignoring the pounding from the side of my head, I took the opportunity to scurry away from the body I was half lying on top, still not fully aware of what had gone down. On my hands and knees, I scampered away from the 2 culprits until I was a good 3 feet away, before the exhaustion wearied me down. With my blurred vision, the result of both my frantic tears and the collision with the ground, I turned around to face my fate, expecting the 2 men to be towering over me, ready to snatch me away. But through hazy eyes, I found them both sprawled out in odd angles on the asphalt, their bodies frozen. I traced their bodies to find them, each bearing a bloody wound. My eyes then fell on the third party, which my brain finally came to acknowledge. Through my blurred vision, I could only see the silhouette of a tall man, carrying a dark weapon in his gloved right hand. Silenced gun. My mind identified. That was the noise I must have heard earlier. With no more strength left within my body to hold me upright, I allowed my elbows to give in and fell backward on the clammy asphalt, the pounding in my head seemingly increasing with time. I accepted my inevitable fate, and watched through unfocused eyes as the armed silhouette neared me, until the last of my vision turned black and I fell unconscious. Chapter 16. I was consciously aware of all that was going down. I could feel the motion and I could hear the noise, but my eyelids felt too heavy to be lifted up, so my vision remained blank as I kept my eyes shut. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I was lying still, but I was also moving. I was surrounded by an alternating noise that consisted mostly of passing vehicles and the chatter of bystanders. The place felt cool. My right shoulder was going numb from the air shooting straight at it. My best guess was that I was in a car. Eventually I zoned out. I wasn't fully aware, but I wasn't gone either. All I could tell for sure was that my head was pounding, and I was cold. The second time I became consciously aware was when a pair of strong, feverish arms wrapped around my torso and pulled me towards its body. I was swept off the cool leather seats and into the chest of my carrier. The broadness of their build had me guessing it was a man, and his touch on the back of my legs was so heated it felt out of place against my cold skin. I was suddenly engulfed in his unusual warmness, and his chest was rapidly heaving up and down against my cheek. I wished he'd stop breathing so quickly so I could peacefully fall back asleep. Then he spoke, in a voice so strained and low it sounded like he was growling rather than speaking actual words. "She's hurt." It was an accusation, directed at someone else. "Forgive me. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." I took care of the two, but in the process one of them dropped her. This one's tone wasn't like the first. His voice was low but not in anger, rather in shame and guilt. "You took care of them in her presence." The chest was now vibrating, and it annoyed me all the more. My head was pounding worse now. Shouldn't they know not to move an injured person so much? I tried to open my mouth to give the strangers a piece of my mind, but all that came out was a low, pained groan. The noise vibrated through my sore throat, and I winced internally, scolding myself for not choosing to keep my mouth shut. The air whooshed around me for a second or two. Then I was slowly pushed away from the cozy chest and lowered onto a stiff, uncomfortable bedding. The warmth left me, and I felt sick again. Someone approached me with cold fingertips, inspecting my left eyebrow, then gently pressing on it with a burning tip. I inhaled sharply, and then the disturbing scent of chemicals hit my senses. The combination of a pounding headache, a sore throat, and the unsettling sense was making me very nauseous. So I decided to shut them all out with some sleep. I let go of my fight against unconsciousness, and allowed the darkness to completely engulf my senses one more time. When I finally woke up, my dry eyes inspected the unfamiliar furnishings laid out in the room, and I found that everything from the dresser ahead of the bed I was lying on top to the pillows thrown across the tile floor was black. The only exception was the off-white walls, the tile floor, and a white wooden door. To my right was a wide window, and the sunlight was streaming through, brightening the darkened room with its blinding rays. I reached for the heavy blanket draped on top of me and yanked it off, sighing in content as the slight breeze cooled my clammy legs. My back was drenched in sweat, and I had no doubt that when I got off the bed I'd see the sweat stains it left behind on the sheets. I cringed distastefully, rubbing at the hair strands sticking to the back of my neck. I moved towards the end of the bed, dropping my bare legs over the edge and nearly hopping down. It felt like I was lying on top 3 mattresses set over one another. The bed was way higher than what I was used to. As I stood tall in my unfamiliar surrounding, I tried to put together how I had gotten here. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Where he was, I'd never in my life seen the room, but it carried a scent that was all too familiar at instantly, and for some peculiar reason, warmed my insides. It was the scent of mahogany and teak wood. I glanced down at my attire and did a double take. I was drowning in a large grey shirt that fell all the way to the top of my knees. Certainly not mine. As my memory suddenly came flooding in, I had to grasp onto the nightstand to keep myself balanced, the shock nearly sending me down to my knees. I remembered the 2 intruders and I remembered their words. I could hear their footsteps following me down the stairway, and I could feel that one man's rough arms throwing me over his stiff shoulders. I could also remember the pain of falling down head first onto the asphalt as my kidnapper was gunned down with a silencer. My trembling hand raised automatically to touch my left eyebrow, and I immediately hissed as my fingers pushed on a rough surface and the wound stung. Someone must have aided to the gash, since it was covered in what felt like a band-aid. Who had taken me? I decided that the only way to find my answers would be to explore. I made my way towards one of the 2 white doors, and gently lowered the door handle to sneak a glance at what lay on the other side. It was a bathroom. I exhaled the breath I didn't know I was holding in and stepped inside the bathroom. The sight of the wide, inviting shower stall distracted me from all my worries, and I felt an immediate need to hop under the fresh water and rinse away all of yesterday's worries and today's icky sweat. Making sure the door is securely locked behind me, I removed the grey shirt I was put in and discarded it to the side. I wasted no time in jumping under the water, allowing it to stream down my skin and soothe my stiff muscles. The water left a stinging sensation as it rolled over the cut on my left eyebrow, but it wasn't too hurtful to ignore. After a fair minute or two, I searched the stall to find the mini containers of shower gel and shampoo. They smelled fresh and earthy, like a mixture of wildflowers. When I stepped out of the shower stall, I felt like a brand new person. The feelings of ecstasy and relief followed by freshening up after a long journey distracted me from the real issues at hand. I was in a stranger's bathroom. I was kidnapped and being held against my will, in God knows where. Instead of throwing a fit and searching for a way out, I was enjoying a hot shower. I felt so ridiculous. I face-palmed myself in disbelief. Across the shower stall was a brand new, clean bathrobe. The sight of it brought forth yesterday's memories, and I desperately shook the thoughts away. I reached out for it and put it on, securing it well around the waist. My wet hair was left falling over my shoulders, and as I turned to inspect myself in the mirror above the sink, I found the small band-aid over my left eyebrow coming off. I slowly pulled it off, examining the damages done. It didn't look too bad. There was a slight gash over my eyebrow that was reddened up and already healing, with a medium-sized blue bruise above it, but it could easily be dismissed as being the result of a clumsy accident. The door handle began to rattle. I gasped and stepped away from the sink, my eyes falling on the handle as it was lowered repeatedly. My eyes searched around the bathroom for any object to shield myself with from whatever awaited on the other side, but I found nothing of use. Then there was a knock on the door. "Nora," the stranger called out softly. To my surprise, they weren't trying to break down the door, nor were they aggressively demanding that I step out, which was very confusing. "Nora, could you please unlock the door? Please." I did a double take. These men are awfully respectful for kidnappers, as much as I hated it. I couldn't keep myself locked up in the bathroom forever. Breathing in deeply, I prepared myself to take on whatever expected me on the other side of the door. I balled up my right fist, keeping my left foot ahead of my right's, and gently unlocked the door. As the click sounded, it got pushed open from the other side. I stepped aside to let the door fully open and gasped as my eyes fell on the man standing behind it, looking all too familiar. Xavier. He was the one who ordered my kidnapping now. My breath got stuck in my throat. "Are you all right?" All right," I exclaimed in disbelief. His eyebrows furrowed in confusion and he took a step forward, reaching out for me. Simultaneously, my right fist raised higher in warning. His gaze locked in on my tightened fist, and he raised his hands up in defense. "I'm not going to hurt you." "Nor, did you do this?" I was yelling now. "Did you plan this?" No. He was shaking his head frantically. "I can explain everything. Just calm down." I chuckled humorlessly. "Are you seriously asking me to calm down?" That was plain idiotic. The situation practically screamed freak out. Xavier shook his head. "I understand your distress. Believe me. But you must allow me to explain." He took another step forward, and without a second of hesitation, my fist imitated his movement. It swung forward, aiming directly at his left jaw. But within the same second, Xavier ducked and reached out for my fist, his palm coming over my entire hand and pulling me forward. In a blink of an eye, I was turned around so my back was against his chest and my arm between us, captured behind my back. I blinked, still trying to comprehend how fast everything transitioned. My right foot came up, and with all my might I lowered it onto his own. He didn't even flinch. "I'm not going to hurt you." He breathed against my ear. "Allow me to explain." It didn't feel like I had any more say in the matter, considering our current state, with him holding the upper hand. Reluctantly, I nodded. His hold loosened a little on my arm, so I took the opportunity to shake it off entirely and turned around to face him. staying on guard in case he decides to pull any trick on me. Xavier backed up a step and gestured towards the bedroom. I walked out and went towards the window, then turned around and crossed my arms, waiting for his explanation. He moved to stand a few feet in front of me, his hands going inside the pockets of his black dress pants. "How are you feeling?" His guilt-ridden eyes fell on the gash on my eyebrow. "I'm fine." He pursed his lips, not entirely convinced by my answer. "Words can't begin to explain how sorry I am, Nora. None of this was supposed to happen." I could feel the pain behind his restricted voice, though I wasn't sure what the reason behind it was. "Why are you sorry? I thought you had nothing to do with it." My back stiffened in alert. "Not the way you think I do. I didn't order those men to kidnap you, but I might have been the reason behind it," he explained. I frowned in confusion. "Why would they kidnap me because of you?" Xavier inhaled deeply, his eyes falling to the ground. When he looked back up, I could tell his thoughts were running wild from the distressed look behind his eyes. "It's due to my line of business. I have made lots of enemies," was his vague response. Like that was supposed to make any sense. As if that was enough to answer this whole crazy mess. I continued staring at him expectantly, waiting for a better explanation. He exhaled deeply, running his hand through his already messy hair. Xavier then turned and gestured towards the couch, inviting me to take a seat. I shook my head in refusal. "Just explain to me what the hell is going on." "Xavier," I was beginning to get really frustrated, and my patience was running thin. "Those men must have tracked you down after our lunch date yesterday," he began to explain. "They must have perceived you as my weak point and wanted to use that to their advantage, lure me in to take me down. That's how rivalries work." "So what? You make enemies for a living?" He tilted his head to the side, studying me. "In a sense." My hands running through my wet hair. "Then how did I get here?" "Just as precaution. I had one of my men keep an eye on you after I took you home. He interfered when things got out of hand." My head snapped to him so curtly, I worried I might have cracked a bone. "You had someone watch me?" Xavier nodded hesitantly. "Just for precaution." "Precaution?" I exclaimed. "When I agreed to have lunch with you, I was not signing up to be followed and watched by a random man. I realized that. And as I said earlier, I'm terribly sorry for putting you through all of this. Nora, things just took a wrong turn this past month and I interrupted him before he could go on any further. "What is it that you do?" "Xavier, there was no way a legal business created this many enemies. Ones that were crazy enough to kidnap a completely innocent outsider just to spite their rival off. I already told you. I manage shipments in and out of the region." When his words registered differently in my brain, my heart began thrumming so loudly that I could hear the beats ring in my ears. I was too afraid to ask what type of shipments his business managed. With a dry throat, I croaked the question, "So you're a drug dealer now?" Xavier exclaimed quickly. "The complete opposite. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilbe, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." While simultaneously staring at him in horror. "What's the opposite of being a drug dealer?" I asked, confused. Xavier sighed. "I stop their trades within my state." My eyes widened. "So you're a cop?" He shook his head again. I huffed loudly. "What are you then?" I exclaimed in frustration. "There's no specific title for it. Nora, as I told you, it's a family business. My father and grandfather all worked within the same field, and now I've taken after them. All that information was weighing me down, quite literally." I walked heavily towards the bed and sat down on the edge of it. "So then, your enemies are drug dealers." An ice-cold shiver ran down my spine at the mere thought of having mobs of drug dealers high behind my heels. Xavier didn't provide an answer, but when I glanced up at his reaction, his eyes were so full of remorse and pained guilt that for a second my heart ached for him. He gave me a short nod, his hard, set eyes moving to the floor while baring a clenched jaw. "But I can promise you, Nora, this will be the last time anything like this ever happens to you." My heart leapt right out of my chest. My first thought after breaking down those words was that he was going to walk away, leave me behind to ensure all ties are broken off. And the thought clenched around my heart so tightly it brought tears to my eyes. Why was I so attached to a stranger I had just met? I felt so ridiculous. They will never hurt you again, Xavier promised sincerely. I will protect you until my very last breath. My eyes snapped up to him. Those were very big words, and I didn't think I was ready to hear them coming from him just yet. Chapter 17. I think I'd like to go home. I finally managed to whisper after staying silent for so long. Xavier glanced up from burning daggers at the floor, his jaw so clenched I feared he might break his teeth. His worried eyes studied me for a fair minute, searching for warning signs behind my eyes. There's one more thing we should discuss, he proclaimed. What is it? My heart began to race again. It seemed to do that quite often lately. His hand came up to stroke the stubble growing on his chin, and his eyes roamed around the floor as if in preparation to whatever he was going to say. That only seemed to increase my angst. When he finally looked up, his deep silver gaze captured my own in a captive hold. I believe it might be safer for you if you return to Indiana with me. I was so distracted and bewitched by his heart-warming gaze that my ears failed to capture the words leaving his mouth. What? I whispered. But a second later, my ears managed to pick up on the echo of his words. It took my brain a few seconds to long to fully decipher the meaning behind them. But this time, my question came out in disbelief. It's the only way I can maintain your full protection while simultaneously aiding to my personal affairs. I gazed at Xavier's facial expression for a whole minute, waiting for his serious persona to break with a huge smile and hear him exclaim, "Just kidding." But it never broke, so instead I broke out into a hysterical laugh. Xavier frowned worriedly, confused by my reaction. I took a deep breath to compose myself, holding my chuckles in. Are you seriously asking me to move to another state? I was beginning to question whether this whole thing was even real. Maybe he was playing a prank on me, trying to impress me. Shouldn't we perhaps? I puckered my lips, stifling a smile. Wait till after the second date. Xavier's brows narrowed in disapproval. Not enjoying my teasing. I'm perfectly serious. Nora. The smile was swept off my face. Are you out of your mind? Xavier. I stood up from my seat on the bed to approach him, stopping a couple feet away. He was a fair foot taller than me, so I had to tilt my chin upwards to stare directly into his eyes. I am not going to leave my home and everything that I know behind just because some sad excuse of a mobster who failed in successfully delivering his products is holding a pathetic grudge against you. Xavier studied my facial expression for a while, taking in my words. It's not as simple as you think it is, Nora. The frustration and distress evident in his eyes. I don't care. I took a step back. I'm going home. I turned to walk away, and in the process my hand brushed against the soft texture of my bathrobe. I glanced down at my attire and face palmed when I realized this is my best option, since I have no clothes here. Sighing, I continued towards the door. I reached out for the handle to pull the door open, but was stopped when a hand slammed the door back shut. I spun on my heels to come face to, just was Xavier, who was standing tall behind me. His hand lowered from the door and fell to his side. What? Ignoring the sparks igniting within my world from his unusually warm, close proximity, Xavier took a step back so I could lift my head up and meet his eyes. Let me at least drive you back. His shimmery silver orbs fell down to inspect my attire. And let me give you something better to wear. I thought over his statement for a second. You keep a spare pair of women's clothing in your home. There was a faint pang at my chest the second those words left my lips. No, Nora. I don't. Xavier fought off a smile. The best thing I can offer is a men's shirt and sweats. It was my turn to hide a smile. A relieved one. For that matter, I nodded in acceptance and stepped to the side, giving him full access to the door. Xavier chuckled once he noticed my relieved expression, and shook his head heading out of the door. A warm blush crept up my cheeks, spreading over my skin and nestling over my nose. He returned less than a minute later and handed me a pair of black shirt and sweats to sizes too big. I thanked him and returned to the bathroom, switching from my bathrobe to the new outfit. I turned to study my reflection in the mirror before leaving, and my eyes widened in embarrassment, noticing how revealing the black shirt was on me, considering it was made of a thin layer. My cheeks reddened as I began panicking. Maybe I could ask for a jacket as well. But who'd wear a jacket in this summer heat? I groaned loudly. I have no other choice. Reaching for the bathroom door, I pulled it an inch open, shoving my head through the small opening and searching for Xavier in the room. He was seated on the edge of the bed, his palms fisted on his lap as he waited patiently. His head snapped up when the bathroom door creaked, and I had to resist the urge to burst out laughing as I witnessed his reaction. His eyes widened in horror as he saw a single head sticking out of the door, my body being hidden behind it. "Do you have a jacket?" I asked hopefully, praying he won't question my request. Xavier stood up instantly and cleared his throat. I may have something. Let me check." And he walked out the door. I sighed and stepped inside the bathroom, closing the door behind and leaning against it. Stupid boobs. A faint knock sounded behind me. I turned and unlocked the door, seeing Xavier standing on the other side with another article of clothing in his hand, which he was offering me. However, didn't find my own as he respectfully lowered his gaze and kept them on the floor. My heart fell to my stomach and burst into 1,000 little butterflies. I could only find an old sweater. "I hope that's okay," Xavier asked. I grinned. "Perfect." I took the navy blue sweater out of his hands and stepped back inside. As I was putting it on, my arms got lost in the length of the sleeves. This one was probably 3 sizes too big, but that wasn't an issue. It meant more coverage while also offering more space for airing, in case it got unusually hot outside. Offering a satisfied smile to my reflection in the mirror, I ran my hands through my hair to straighten the wet knots before heading out the door. This time, Xavier wasn't in the room. I left through the bedroom door to search for him down the extending hallway, but it was just as empty, so I traveled along the house searching for him. I reached the staircase at the end of the hallway, and it's whirled elegantly down to floors. The railing was a vintage gold and was slightly chipped off on some areas, but it felt so smooth I couldn't resist the urge to run my palm over it as I descended the stairs. The first floor was brighter than the second, with a large window down the hallway aiding the path. There was an equal amount of doors to the second floor, and I wondered how many lived in this house with so many bedrooms. I continued down the stairs until I reached the ground floor and was met with an extravagant hall. A wide table set in the front with a large vase of fresh roses, and the front door directly behind it bearing windows so wide the house was entirely brightened by the natural daylight. Above me hung the most grandeur golden chandelier I had had the pleasure to see, and by that point I lost all control on my jaw muscles as it fell to the floor. "Do you like it?" A voice sounded from behind me. I spun around on my heels and my nose nearly bumped into a broad chest. I looked up to see Xavier standing a step above me, glancing down at me with hopeful eyes. "It's the most beautiful house I've ever seen," I admitted. It truly was the most elegant house I'd ever been to. "There is one exception," Xavier began as he moved past me to descend the few remaining steps. He stood at the bottom of the stairs and turned around to face me, his hands inside the pockets of his dress, pants and a faint smile on his lips. "My house in Indiana." He trailed off, and I didn't need a smarter brain to take on the hidden meaning behind his words. He thought that would tempt me to accept his offer. "That's nice. Can we go now?" Xavier nodded with a slight frown, disappointed by his failed attempt, and gestured towards the front door. We walked out, side by side, and set right in front of the house was his black Range Rover. We were in a different neighborhood, one I've never been to before, and his property was bigger than I imagined, with a wide front garden bearing gorgeous flowers. "Where are we?" I asked Xavier once we settled inside his car. "About an hour away from your place." He glanced at me sideways to study my reaction. "Do you like the area?" he asked as he began driving away from the house. I nodded. "It's beautiful. Do you often come here?" Is that why you bought this place? I only visit once every few years. And this place actually belongs to my uncle. But he's currently away on vacation. I found myself wanting to hear more about his family. Does your uncle work with you in the family business? Xavier shook his head. He did many years ago alongside my father. But once he got married, he decided he wanted to maintain a low profile and live away from the troubles associated with the business. I nodded. That's understandable. Xavier glanced my way. Do you remember what happened last night? I thought your friends were staying with you. But you were all alone. The memories came flooding in cue. But the part that remained blank was what went down after cold fingers inspected the wound on my left eyebrow. When the word friends registered in my brain, my eyes widened. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Oh my God. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I exclaimed, my heart dropping. She was supposed to come home later that night. What if Xavier cut me off? Shaking his head. Don't worry. She's all right. How do you know? I whispered through a tightened throat. We checked in on her. She's safe. I let out a breath, relaxing in my seat. A few seconds of silence passed between us as I tried to recall last night. I don't remember much after I fell off that man's shoulder. I admitted after a while. When I didn't receive a comment, I took a glimpse at Xavier to see him coldly staring ahead at the road with a clenched jaw, the tight muscles prominent under his trimmed beard. Can you tell me what happened? I asked hopefully. I hated blacking out and not knowing what went down while I was out. After you were brought here by a trusted guard, I had a doctor aid to your injury. She later changed you into a more fitting clothing and I carried you to rest in my room. Xavier glanced at my reaction, and my eyes widened as I realized it never occurred to me to ponder over how I'd been changed into a shirt. Now that it was mentioned, I was beyond grateful that a woman had done it. Thank you, I whispered, and I truly was so thankful Xavier had someone keep an eye out for me. No matter how unsettling it sounded at first, because God only knows where I'd be by now if he hadn't stepped in at the right moment. A thought tight in my stomach came to a knot, and I had to focus on regulating my breath to avoid panicking. You shouldn't be thanking me, Nora. His voice came out rougher than before, and his chest rumbled with a restrained growl. I'm the reason all of this happened to you. I shook my head. You didn't do anything wrong. It was their doing. His knuckles turned white as he tightened his grip on the steering wheel. And I swear to you, they will pay for what they did. I could only stare at his knuckles in response, seeing this side of Xavier stir feel. All too familiar emotion deep within my heart. I felt my throat tightening, and I didn't like one bit of it, knowing better than to argue against his word. I kept my mouth shut, my heart racing as I began to panic the memories I buried so deep within my unconscious resurfacing. I turned to stare straight ahead as we neared the city center. Xavier must have sensed the uneasiness I felt, because he shifted in his seat to look at me, but I kept my eyes straight ahead. I mean, he cleared his throat. I'll deal with it. I'll make sure this never happens again. I shook my head. It doesn't matter. Xavier. What do you mean? I mean, soon you'll return to Indiana, and I'll stay here. It doesn't matter, because it'll never happen again. I explained. The words pulled at my heart, strings and I had to curl my hands into clenched fists to compose myself, the nails digging into my palms and surely leaving a mark behind. Xavier repeatedly glanced from the road to my face then back again, but I avoided his eyes, knowing they would surely break me with the power they held over me. Nora, he began to argue, understanding perfectly what I was insinuating. It's for the best. My voice came out stiff, hard as ice. I kept my eyes on the road, avoiding him. I could tell he was trying to find a way to argue with me, but he couldn't find the proper words, probably taken aback by my sad and decision to end whatever was on the verge of beginning. But I couldn't repeat history. I could never relive my past. Chapter 18. When Xavier parked his car across my apartment complex, I was surprised to see him preparing to step out of it. The engine was switched off and he unbuckled his seat belt. I stopped in the midst of unbuckling my own and studied his actions in confusion. Xavier noticed my hesitance and looked over with bewildered eyes. "Are you going somewhere?" I knew my question sounded dumb, but I couldn't find a better way to word my confusion. A faint smile graced his lips. "The least you could allow me to do is see you through. Otherwise, I won't be able to sleep peacefully tonight." I reflected over his offer, reluctantly. I didn't want this to mean anything. The faster we part ways, the easier moving on will be. Plus, a bigger part of me worried what my friends will think of me bringing Xavier up to my apartment. While wearing his clothes, thinking about my friends brought back yesterday's unpleasant memories, and accompanied by them was a painful pang that rang through my chest. As childish as it seemed, I had an instant urge to disobey Elliot's orders, just to piss him off. I knew for sure that if he saw me with Xavier he would flip, and I was dying to see him do just that. Sure, I reached out for the door handle, but not before noticing the wide grin that spread over Xavier's face, his contagious excitement radiating off of him and creeping over me so that I ended up smiling just as cheerfully. I glanced sideways at the street before crossing to the other side, Xavier following close behind. Once we reached the elevator, he hit the button, then waited patiently by my side, standing so close that our shoulders brushed occasionally. As we ascended up to my floor, I began speaking just as the elevator doors spread open. "I gotta warn you though, my humble abode goes nowhere near the extravagance you're surely used to." Xavier rolled his eyes, biting back a smile. "I'm sure your place is lovely." We strode down the hall until we reached my apartment door. When Xavier questioned, "Shouldn't we have asked someone for a spare key?" I shook my head. "My place is always occupied." I reached out and opened the door, and as expected, it was unlocked. I glanced at Xavier's expression to see him frowning at the door in disapproval. The second I took a step inside my apartment, my body was engulfed by another human being's. The arms wrapped around my shoulders and squashed me to a hard, flat chest, my nose scrunching up as it was pressed against a broad shoulder. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm." "Nora," a raspy voice yelled in my ear. I flinched and tried to push myself away from the hard chest. Noah stepped back once he realized my intention, but he didn't let go of me completely. His hands remained on my shoulders as his wide, frantic eyes searched my own. They moved over my face, and I could hear the breath hitching in his throat as he suddenly stopped breathing. He composed himself and clenched his jaw tightly, his hand coming up to poke a cold finger against the bruise on the side of my forehead. I flinched back, glaring at him. "I'm fine, Noah," I whispered softly. It had completely left my mind that I bore a small gash that would surely raise questions. "What the hell happened to you?" His voice was so low, I could barely hear his question even though I stood 2 feet away. "It was a clumsy accident. No big deal." I stepped to the side to walk away, but Noah copied my movement and blocked my way. A sudden cough sounded from behind me, and Noah's jade eyes moved from my face to the man behind me, widening then hardening in fearful rage. I instantly knew what was coming up next. My hands flew up to be placed against Noah's stiff shoulders as he lunged at Xavier, no doubt falsely believing he had something to do with my injury. "Noah, calm down," I yelled, pushing him backwards with all my might. His fists were clenched by his sides and his eyes never left Xavier. "He saved me." I defended Xavier. Noah's eyes snapped down to my face, the rage slowly dissipating and confusion taking over. "What the hell happened?" he demanded. "I will tell you if you just back off." Instead of stepping back, his eyes remained studying my face, and I could see the rage burning behind them. "Nora," Ariel's voice came from down the hallway. I let my hands fall from Noah's shoulders and turned to greet her, her worried eyes inspecting my face and widening the second they fell on my forehead. I spoke before she had the chance to open her mouth. "It's nothing. I'm fine," I mumbled, but Ariel shook her head fiercely, yanking me forward by the sweater into a crushing embrace. I hugged her back and patted her shoulders, reassuring her that I am. Where have you been? We've been calling your cell non. Stop, but you never answered, and just this morning I found it by your tub. And Paul's been hurt. He's been hospitalized because apparently someone attacked him last night. We've been worried sick. Nora, I interrupted Ariel's long rant by slamming my palm against her mouth to stop them from moving, knowing it's the only way I could silence her. Stop. I'll explain everything. Her wild eyes searched my own, then slowly relaxed as she breathed in. She glanced down at my hand still covering her mouth and nodded. So I removed it and lowered it to my side. I realized then that we were still standing in the doorway, so I turned to walk towards the living room. And on cue, the rest followed behind. I sat down on the couch and Ariel took the seat next to me. I motioned for Xavier to take the seat across from us and he offered me a tight smile. Moving to sit down. Noah, however, refused to and stood all jittery in front of me with his foot impatiently and anxiously tapping against the floor. I fell asleep in the bathtub. I began to explain the filtered events of last night from the very beginning, fully aware that random details mattered the most to my friends. When I woke up and left to the room, I found that a burglar had broken in. Ariel gasped sharply, while Noah's eyebrows furrowed. He threatened me, but I fought him off and ran away. In the process, I stumbled to the floor and got slightly hurt. I pointed towards the small gash on my forehead, but Xavier helped me sort it all out, so there's nothing to worry about now. I refused to even glimpse Xavier's way, since I could practically feel the disapproval radiating off of his body. I had been thinking the entire ride back about what I'd tell them, and now that I was put on the spot I realized that I couldn't have my friends worrying about me any more than they already were. Thus the problem was sorted out and there was nothing to worry about. So why make it a big deal when we can all move forward and pretend it never happened? Oh, Nora. Ariel's voice broke, and she wrapped her quivering arm around my shoulders and pulled me to a comforting embrace. I allowed her to do so, even though I was practically boiling now beneath the heavy sweater, and my conscience was yelling profanities at me for lying to the people who cared about me the most. I blocked out the thoughts and buried my guilt deep into my unconscious. Noah sighed and ran his fingers through his tousled hair. Are you all right? He didn't hurt you, did he? His voice came out in a low hiss. I shook my head, reassuring him that I'm perfectly well, all thanks to Xavier, who, speaking of, was burning daggers at me with his sharp gaze. Did they take you in for questioning? Noah asked. I looked up at him in confusion, not fully understanding his question. He rolled his eyes. To file a report against the burglar. Nora. My mouth formed an O shape, and I nodded frantically. Yea, no. Simultaneously, all three heads snapped to where Xavier sat, his jaw set in powerful resolve. My eyes widened, and I frowned at him, moving my eyebrows around like a mad woman as I silently questioned what he was doing by answering my question for me. They did not get her statement. His eyes were set on me as he answered Noah's inquiry, filled with a determination that had my heart racing. Why not? Noah snapped rather rudely. I was literally begging Xavier with my eyes, shaking my head ever so slightly as to not grab Ariel's attention but also manage to send the message across to Xavier. Don't, I mouthed, because none of what Nora just said happened last night. It felt as if someone had splashed an ice-cold bucket of water down my back. My jaw hit the floor and I stared at Xavier in pure horror, my throat restricting. Ariel removed her arm from around me to pull back and search for answers in my facial expression, while Noah clenched and relaxed his fists repeatedly. What are you saying? He hissed dangerously. Xavier's eyes moved from my shocked ones to Noah. Last night, Nora was subjected to an attempted kidnapping. Ariel's sharp gasp startled me and I flinched back. She stared at me with horror, stricken, tear-filled eyes. My heart ached with guilt. This was the exact look that I was trying to avoid. I was beyond livid. I felt a sudden impulse to strike Xavier across his perfectly sculpted face. After our date earlier in the day, I had one of my men keep a respectful eye on her for safe measures. He interfered when things got out of control and successfully ended whatever dangers lurked. Xavier finished explaining. My eyes were now stinging. Noah inhaled sharply and slowly turned around to peek at me. The second his eyes met mine, I felt my world crumbling as my heart clenched. His eyes were so cold and distant. I wished the ground could open up and swallow me whole as my guilt gnawed at my chest. Noah, I called out for him, but he silenced me by turning around swiftly and heading towards the door. I jumped up from my seat, startling Ariel, and rushed to follow behind his steps. Noah, wait. His footsteps came to a sudden halt and I nearly ran into his back. He turned around to face me, his eyes no longer those cozy pair of jade that I grew to love, but instead they held layers of pain resulting from betrayal and disappointment, and I could no longer hold back the tears as they tore through my guard and streamed down my face. Please, don't leave, I begged, my voice coming out in a low whisper as it was so close to breaking. I'll do exactly what you asked me to do. Nora, I'll back off, he said quietly, and I hated the low tone of his voice. I would have much rather had him yell at me for lying to him, to express his anger and disappointment in me on the spot rather than play the ticking time bomb that'll explode any second. I shook my head fervently. No, I'm sorry I lied. I didn't want to worry you. Let me spare you the trouble. Because you will write it your life. You should live it whichever way you please. With that he spared me no sec, and look as he turned to leave through the door. My mouth hung open in pained shock because I could not fight his words in any way. I stood frozen as I watched the front door get slammed shut and the echo travel across my apartment, feeling like the tenderest part of my heart had been torn out of my chest. Nora, Xavier's voice came from behind me, no doubt trying to play the sympathetic role and comfort me after single-handedly shoving everything in my life downhill. My pain instantly turned into boiling rage, and I spun on my heels so curtly and stomped over to him, stopping a mere foot away. My index finger shoved at his chest so roughly that I could feel my nail digging into his skin. But of course, he didn't even flinch. Get out, I seethed between clenched teeth. He shook his head, his palms coming up to defense. Nora, I don't care what you have to say. Xavier, get out, I spat angrily. He hesitated again, standing still in his place, and I had to resist the urge to smack him and take all my anger and frustration out on him. I think it's pretty clear that you're no longer welcome here. So leave. Ariel's voice sounded as she came up to stand beside me, her arms crossing over her chest as she glared at Xavier daringly. I was surprised to find Xavier not even sparing a glance her way. His sparkling eyes remained fixated on my own. I stood my ground and raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to make a move. Eventually, he gave in and took a step to the side. See you soon, Nora. With that he stalked towards the front door. I couldn't find it in me to give a snarky remark about how he never will, too pained by Noah's departure, and already fishing for ways to make it up for continuously lying to him. I had never felt like a bigger jerk. Ariel sensed my unease and gently grabbed my arm, directing me back towards the couch. I sat down beside her, my eyes fixated on the floor and my mind running wild. Lying to him like that was wrong. Nora, we all know that, she started, but we'll find a way to fix it. Don't worry. Having my best friend support at a time I deserved it the least did it for me. I broke down into pain sobs and crushed my body into Ariel's, my arms wrapping around her shoulders tightly as she gently reassured me and stroked my hair the way she always did whenever my damned luck took its toll on me.